Nearly 1 million people died in a historic famine, around 400,000 became refugees, and nearly 200,000 children were left orphaned. Ethiopia once became a global symbol of poverty and humanitarian crisis. Yet just 4 decades later, this same country is generating more than $50 billion annually from agriculture and helping feed hundreds of millions of people. So what changed? How did a nation located near the equator, once struggling with chronic food shortages, build one of the largest agricultural sectors in Africa? From the forests where Arabica coffee was born, to highland fields producing millions of tons of grain each year, to one of the largest livestock populations on the planet, Ethiopia is proving that history does not always determine the future. And now, join Agriculture Insight as we explore the story behind this remarkable transformation. Although Ethiopia lies near the equator, instead of being concentrated in hot deserts or savannas, most of the country's population and agricultural activity are located on highlands, ranging from 1,100 to more than 3,000 meters above sea level. This remarkable elevation makes Ethiopia an exception in Africa. Its cool climate, abundant rainfall, and fertile mountain slopes have nurtured the forests where Arabica coffee originated, vast grasslands that support tens of millions of livestock, and grain fields stretching across the highlands. However, this terrain has also made the development of large-scale agriculture a constant challenge. Mountains and valleys divide the landscape, making farming, transportation, and the expansion of agricultural production far more complicated than on the vast plains of the United States or Europe. For thousands of years, Ethiopians have had to adapt to these conditions. And it is this process of adaptation that has created one of the most diverse and distinctive agricultural systems in Africa. Did you know that around 60% of the world's coffee production comes from Arabica coffee? In the homeland of this coffee variety, scientists believe that the first wild Arabica plants emerged in the rainforests of the Ethiopian highlands thousands of years ago. Today, many of these forests still preserve natural Arabica populations, which are considered one of the world's most important coffee gene reservoirs as climate change and disease increasingly threaten coffee-growing regions. To make use of this treasure, coffee harvesting in Ethiopia is carried out almost entirely by hand due to the country's high altitude, steep, and fragmented terrain. The workforce mainly consists of smallholder farmers and local residents living in the highlands. They must walk deep into forests or plantations, carefully selecting and picking each ripe coffee cherry by hand rather than stripping entire branches at once. This work requires tremendous patience and sustained physical effort. After harvest, coffee is typically processed using 2 main methods. Most Ethiopian coffee undergoes dry processing, in which the coffee cherries are left intact with their skin and fruit flesh before being spread out on raised bamboo drying beds under the sun for several weeks. During this period, farmers must constantly turn the cherries to ensure even drying and prevent mold growth. Once fully dried, the outer layers are removed using milling machines to reveal the green coffee beans inside. Spending days resting inside the sweet fruit allows the beans to absorb natural sugars, resulting in rich, sweet coffees with notes of ripe fruits such as blueberry, peach, and honey, flavors that are highly prized in the specialty coffee market. Meanwhile, wet processed coffee is sent directly to a depulping machine immediately after harvesting. Here, rotating drums and flowing water quickly remove most of the outer skin and fruit flesh, helping to prevent uncontrolled fermentation that could negatively affect the flavor of the beans. However, after this stage, the coffee beans are still coated with a sticky, sugar-rich mucilage layer. They are therefore soaked in water tanks for 24 to 72 hours, allowing naturally occurring microorganisms to break down the remaining mucilage. Once fermentation is complete, an important manual sorting stage begins. Farmers use wooden rakes to continuously stir the beans through flowing water channels, washing away any remaining mucilage. The beans are then spread out on raised drying beds for approximately 7 to 15 days until their moisture content falls to around 10 to 12%. During this period, farmers must turn the beans several times a day to ensure even drying and prevent mold growth. Only after reaching the target moisture level are the beans milled to remove the protective parchment layer, producing green coffee beans ready for export and roasting. Because the beans are separated from the fruit flesh before drying, this method produces a distinctly different final product. A cleaner cup, brighter and more pronounced acidity, and a clearer expression of the coffee's intrinsic flavor characteristics. From here, roughly 500,000 tons of coffee are shipped from Ethiopia each year, making the country the largest coffee producer and exporter in Africa. Long before lattes, pour-overs, or modern espresso machines appeared, Ethiopians had already perfected one of the oldest coffee traditions in the world. During traditional coffee ceremonies, the preparation of coffee is carried out almost exclusively by women. The beans are roasted in front of guests on a small pan, ground with a wooden mortar and pestle, and then brewed in a distinctive clay pot known as a jebana. A coffee ceremony can last for more than an hour, and is considered a time for family members, neighbors, and friends to gather, talk, and strengthen their relationships. In many rural areas, people also add a few sprigs of tina adam, an aromatic herb with flavors reminiscent of lemon, mint, and citrus, to a cup of hot water. It is not used as a sweetener like cinnamon or sugar. Instead, this native Ethiopian herb gives the ceremony a distinctly local character, softening the coffee's aroma and significantly mellowing the sharp bitterness naturally found in Highland Arabica beans. More than 100 times smaller than a wheat grain, teff is one of the smallest cereal crops in the world, yet it has sustained the people of Ethiopia for thousands of years. Thanks to its ability to tolerate both drought and waterlogging, teff occupies more than 1/5 of Ethiopia's total cultivated land and is the country's most widely consumed staple food, far surpassing rice. When the stalks and leaves turn golden yellow like dry straw, millions of farmers head into the fields to harvest teff using simple sickles. Under the dry heat of the harvest season, bundles of teff are gathered, dried, and then manually threshed and winnowed on the ground. But there is another method that is both less labor-intensive and more fascinating. Many farmers allow cattle to walk in circles over the dried bundles, using the animal's weight to separate the tiny grains from the seed heads without the need for machinery. With an annual production of nearly 5 million tons, Ethiopia is by far the world's largest producer of teff, accounting for more than 95% of global output. As demand for healthy foods continues to grow, teff has gained increasing attention as a super grain, thanks to its high levels of iron, calcium, protein, and fiber, while being naturally gluten-free. In Ethiopia, about 70% of all harvested teff is used to make injera, a slightly sour fermented flatbread that is the country's most important staple food. You can find it in everyday meals across Ethiopia, as easily as you would find tortillas in Mexico or baguettes in bakeries throughout France. Alongside Ethiopia's golden teff fields, the country's highlands are also home to another enormous living asset, the largest livestock population in Africa, contributing as much as 30 to 40% of the total value of the nation's agricultural sector. With more than 70 million cattle and tens of millions of sheep, goats, and camels, Ethiopia possesses one of the largest livestock populations in the world. For many farmers, a herd of cattle serves as the family's savings account, insurance policy, and retirement fund all at once. They rarely sell their animals, except during major life events or natural disasters, because the size of a herd is widely regarded as a measure of a family's wealth and social status. Across the cool highlands that are well suited for grazing, most livestock are raised for draft power and fresh milk production, rather than for meat. The most common animals are indigenous zebu cattle, highly valued for their drought tolerance, endurance, and low maintenance costs. During the rainy season, they graze mainly on natural grasses found in pastures and valleys. During the dry season, they switch to chopped teff straw and other agricultural byproducts. In return, farmers rely on their strength to plow fields, transport agricultural goods, and tread on harvested grain to separate the kernels after each harvest. To witness the immense scale of this livestock economy firsthand, visit major highland livestock markets such as Shashamane or Ambo. From early morning, farmers walk their cattle, sheep, and goats for dozens of kilometers to reach trading centers. Buyers do not evaluate animals through paperwork or electronic records. Instead, they inspect the animal's condition directly, check its teeth to estimate age, feel its muscles, and examine its hump to assess fat reserves and working ability before making an offer. Once a deal is reached, the agreement is often confirmed verbally in front of respected community witnesses. This tradition has transformed livestock markets into more than just places where animals are bought and sold. They also serve as important social hubs that help drive commerce throughout Ethiopia's highland regions. Say goodbye to the cool highlands that have shaped much of Ethiopian agriculture. In the northeastern part of the country lies a completely different world, the Danakil Depression, one of the hottest places on Earth, often referred to as the gateway to hell, where daytime temperatures frequently exceed 113 to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. This landscape exists because Ethiopia sits at the junction of three major tectonic plates that are slowly pulling apart. As the Earth's crust stretches, hot gases, hypersaline water, and minerals from deep underground are continuously pushed to the surface, creating acidic pools and vivid patches of yellow, orange, and blue that make the area look like another planet. What makes this region particularly fascinating is that, despite being covered in salt and mineral deposits, most of it is nearly impossible to exploit. Extreme temperatures, toxic gases, and hazardous terrain have made Danakil famous not for its resources, but because it is one of the few places on Earth where people can witness the early stages of a new ocean being formed. Yet just 10 to 15 kilometers away, thousands of Afar and Tigrayan people continue to endure the harsh conditions, quietly harvesting salt from the vast white salt flats of Lake Assale. The reason this landlocked region, lying more than 100 meters below sea level, contains such enormous salt reserves is its unique geological history. In the distant past, the Red Sea repeatedly flooded the entire depression. Later, as tectonic movements isolated the basin from the sea, the immense body of water gradually evaporated under Danakil's extreme heat, leaving behind salt deposits tens to hundreds of meters thick beneath the ground. A typical workday in Danakil begins before dawn to avoid the worst of the scorching heat. At first glance, these salt flats appear to be nothing more than a thin crust of crystals covering the surface. But to reach the purest salt, workers must first break through the weathered soil and upper salt layers before digging several dozen centimeters down. There are no pneumatic drills or modern mining machines here. Every step relies on physical labor and simple hand tools. Using crowbars, workers pry massive slabs of salt from the ground, then shape them with machetes and short axes into nearly uniform rectangular blocks known as amale. A block that is too large becomes difficult to transport. while one that is too small loses value and reduces transport efficiency. Finally, once the salt blocks have been cut, the backbone of the entire logistics system emerges. Long caravans of camels and donkeys. A fully grown camel can carry around 140 kilograms of salt, while a donkey carries roughly half that amount. Guided by traders, these pack animals travel in long lines across deserts and highlands towards cities deep in the Ethiopian interior. Today, most of this salt is used for food consumption, food preservation, and livestock production. But for many centuries, amole blocks served as a form of currency in various parts of Ethiopia, even being used to determine the value of livestock, grain, and everyday necessities. Known as the green gold of Mexican agriculture, limes are small fruits about the size of a fist, sharper in acidity than lemons, yet remarkably heat-tolerant and well-adapted to dry climates. From tacos and seafood to tequila and cocktails, 95% of Mexico's limes cross the border every year to serve the U.S. market, far surpassing the output of domestic states such as California or Florida. The journey begins in famous growing regions such as Veracruz, which produces most of Mexico's seedless Persian limes with thick, attractive skins, and the valleys of Michoacán, home to a smaller seeded lime that is exceptionally juicy and intensely aromatic. Although agriculture is becoming increasingly modern, Mexican limes are still harvested mainly by hand. Farmers move through the dense tree canopies under intense heat, picking each fruit one by one, placing them into cloth bags worn across the chest, then quickly transferring them onto trucks. Even a small scratch on the peel can cause the fruit to rot or mold quickly during its journey of thousands of kilometers to the United States. Still, a skilled worker can harvest nearly 1 ton of limes per day, a job that demands enormous endurance in temperatures that often exceed 35 to 40 degrees Celsius. As soon as they arrive at the factory, tons of limes immediately enter a modern processing line. They are washed with high-pressure spray systems and sanitizing water tanks, then dried and coated with a thin layer of wax to preserve freshness throughout transportation. Next, laser scanners capture and analyze the surface of each fruit, automatically sorting them by size down to the millimeter, while removing any limes with bruises or scratches before they are packed into export cartons. Mexico's growing regions harvest almost in rotation throughout the year to keep supply from running short. But because the supply chain depends so heavily on Mexico, it can sometimes become extremely fragile. For example, when drought, crop disease, and cartel extortion targeting farms and transport trucks disrupted supply, lime prices in the United States once surged by nearly 300%, forcing many restaurants to reduce portions, raise prices for cocktails, tacos, and seafood, and even temporarily replace fresh limes with bottled lime juice to cut costs. Generating more than $3 billion each year, Mexican avocados now almost completely dominate the U.S. market, with around 80 to 90% of the avocados consumed by Americans imported from Mexico. However, for more than a decade, the avocado industry has also been frequently targeted by criminal groups, which have used violence, pressure, and control to exploit the sector. To understand how this green gold industry operates, let's travel to Michoacán, a mountainous region where cool temperatures, fertile volcanic soils, and elevations reaching 2,500 meters create ideal conditions for Hass avocados with dense, creamy flesh, low fiber content, and a richer, nuttier flavor than many other avocado varieties. The harvest begins early in the morning. On steep mountain slopes, farmers use long picking poles fitted with cutting blades and mesh bags to harvest each avocado entirely by hand. Even a small scratch or minor impact can reduce an avocado's export value. As a result, every fruit must be lowered with extreme care rather than harvested through tree shaking or large-scale mechanized methods. Unlike most other fruits, avocados do not ripen on the tree. They are picked while still firm, allowing them to withstand the journey to the United States and reach supermarket shelves in peak condition just a few days later. All the avocados are gathered at collection points near the growing areas, then quickly transported by specialized trucks to sorting and packing facilities to preserve freshness before export. At the factory, the avocados are washed to remove soil and tree sap, then pass through modern laser scanning systems to check their size, color, and skin quality before being packed into refrigerated containers for export. However, few people realize that behind this billion-dollar industry lies enormous environmental pressure. A single avocado can require more than 200 liters of water to fully develop, while many pine forests in Mexico have been cleared to expand avocado plantations. If Mexico pauses exports for just a few days, avocado prices in U.S. supermarkets can rise almost immediately. But surprisingly, the U.S. government once banned Mexican avocados for nearly 80 years over pest concerns, leaving consumers with only seasonal domestic avocados from California at high prices, instead of the year-round abundance now found on every table, from guacamole to salads. Leaving the avocado groves behind, Mexico's agricultural machine now takes us to the capital of tequila, the birthplace of one of the fastest-growing spirits by revenue in the world. In the state of Jalisco, blue agave plants grow in dry volcanic soils, spending nearly a decade sending their roots deep into the earth before becoming a luxury symbol on party tables across the United States. Unlike Western spirits made from grains that can be harvested after only a few months, an agave plant needs 7 to 10 years to accumulate enough natural sugar in its core. This long waiting period turns harvesting into a high-risk, long-term calculation, where the work is still done entirely by hand by jimadores, skilled agave harvesters whose techniques are passed down through generations. Under the harsh heat of Jalisco, they use a razor-sharp flat shovel called a koa to cut away hundreds of spiky leaves, revealing the unique core, weighing from 40 to more than 100 kilograms and looking like a giant pineapple. With agave, the moment the core is released is also when a high-speed logistics chain begins. The piñas are immediately transported to the factory, split in half, and placed in brick ovens for 24 to 48 hours to convert starches into sugars before being pressed for juice and distilled. Americans now consume more than 70% of Mexico's total tequila exports, turning this fashionable drink into a billion-dollar commercial goldmine each year, a geographical monopoly that no other country can copy, because legally recognized tequila can only be produced in designated regions of Mexico. However, the boom of Hollywood-backed brands such as Casamigos and Teremana is pushing the region's volcanic land and scarce water resources into an alarming state, turning every bottle exported to the United States into a serious trade-off in natural resources. Every November, the state of Sinaloa enters its off-season pepper harvest, supplying export markets from its vast coastal plains. Thanks to its warm, frost-free coastal climate combined with modern greenhouse technology, Mexico is home to more than 60 native pepper varieties and commands roughly 70% of the entire U.S. imported pepper market. Across these expansive fields, pepper harvesting is carried out entirely by hand by tens of thousands of seasonal workers. Moving continuously along the rows, they quickly pick peppers that meet the required size standards and toss them into plastic baskets strapped to their hips under hot and humid conditions. The greatest challenge of this work is not only the outdoor heat, but also the constant exposure to the spicy oils released from the stems and fruit, which workers come into direct contact with for hours at a time. After leaving the orchards, peppers begin a remarkable transformation into a wide range of products. They are strung together in clusters and hung under the sun to dry, creating the iconic red pepper garlands often seen across Mexico. Once dried, they become an essential ingredient in traditional sauces, stews, and seasonings. One of the most famous smoked peppers is chipotle. Fully ripened red jalapenos are slowly smoked over wood until they become dry and infused with a rich, smoky aroma. The finished product delivers deep heat and a distinctive flavor, making it a popular ingredient in sauces, grilled meats, and a wide variety of Mexican dishes. Known as nopal for its pads and tuna for its fruit by indigenous communities, the prickly pear cactus thrives without expensive irrigation systems, transforming some of the driest lands in Puebla and Hidalgo into productive green farms that can be harvested year-round. On rocky slopes and arid terrain, farmers wear thick leather boots and use specialized knives mounted on long poles to cut young nopal pads or carefully harvest ripe tuna fruits. The challenge is not only avoiding the large, razor-sharp spines, but also the countless tiny hair-like glochids that can become airborne in the wind and cause intense irritation if they come into contact with the eyes or skin. After being harvested, prickly pears must go through an extremely careful manual preparation process, using rough brushes or specialized centrifugal machines to completely smooth away the outer layer of spines before they are packed into crates. Today, this spiny fruit is no longer limited to Latino communities. It has become a health food trend thanks to its high fiber content and strong potential for blood sugar control. Americans import more than 50,000 tons of prickly pears each year to make juice, dietary supplements, or serve them directly in high-end restaurant chains as a resource-saving superfood, a profitable solution in an era of worsening water scarcity. While Mexican produce turns the border into a perfect money-printing machine, the country's livestock industry has chosen a different path. Instead of focusing on exporting commercial cuts of meat, it has positioned itself as a raw material supplier for major partner ranches. Beef cattle are a strategic commodity, generating $2 to $3 billion a year through the export of live cattle to the United States for fattening and slaughter. This journey begins on the dry grasslands near the border. Here, heat-tolerant and disease-resistant cattle such as Brahman and Angus crossbreeds are raised on open pasture until they reach an ideal weight of around 150 to 200 kilograms. However, the biggest bottleneck in this entire logistics chain lies at the border inspection stations of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. If even one animal is found with parasitic ticks or signs of foot-and-mouth disease, the entire shipment of hundreds of cattle can be immediately denied entry, putting Mexican ranchers at serious risk of heavy losses. After crossing the border, Mexican cattle are loaded onto specialized semi-trailers and transported directly to massive feedlots in Texas or Kansas. There they are fed with America's own cheap yellow corn to gain weight rapidly before entering industrial slaughter lines. The paradox is that, after being processed into premium steaks, a large portion of this beef is shipped back across the border and sold to high-end supermarkets and restaurants in Mexico. As a result, this logistics cycle creates an ironic economic loop, where some Mexican consumers end up buying their own country's beef under the label of imported American beef, at prices 3 to 5 times higher than its original value. Far away from China's dense urban plains, the journey begins on the Tibetan Plateau and in Qinghai, a region often called the roof of the world, with an average elevation of over 4,000 meters. This is home to more than 14 million yaks, accounting for nearly 90% of the world's total yak population. Completely different from the timid behavior of industrial dairy cattle, Tibetan yaks are semi-wild grazing animals equipped with a thick, double-layered coat and highly specialized respiratory systems that allow them to survive temperatures as low as -40 degrees Celsius and extremely thin air. Under normal conditions, they graze year-round on alpine grasses and wild herbs across the plateau. However, to maximize milk production, herders now supplement their diet with compressed grain feed and fermented hay directly at feeding stations. Even so, the wild instincts of these animals make controlling them extremely dangerous. Yaks are highly territorial, extremely sensitive to unfamiliar sounds, and especially aggressive when they sense their calves are threatened. A fully grown yak can weigh nearly half a ton, powerful enough to knock down or drag an adult human within seconds. To control these violent outbursts, herders cannot rely on ordinary sticks or whips. Instead, they work in teams of 5 to 7 people, with using ropes braided from yak hair to wrestle the animal to the ground, pin its head down, and secure its horns before carrying out medical checks or shearing. A female yak typically takes 4 to 5 years to fully mature before producing her first milk. Every batch of this valuable milk is hand-milked by local herders and poured directly into large aluminum containers. Because grazing areas are scattered across steep mountainous terrain, many herders must transport the milk by motorcycle or horseback to centralized collection stations at the base of the mountains before temperature changes cause the milk to spoil. Here, yak milk is filtered, tested for fat content, and rapidly chilled before being processed into premium products such as high-protein dried cheese and yak butter. Despite their extremely limited production and prices that can reach dozens of dollars per kilogram, these products remain highly sought after in the organic and specialty food market, thanks to their rich flavor and calcium and fat content that are nearly double those of regular cow's milk. If we explore livestock farming more deeply, we will realize that there are actually many types of milk far more nutritious than cow's milk. One notable example is the Bactrian camel, an animal capable of surviving in temperatures ranging from -40°C to scorching desert heat, while producing milk that contains several times more vitamin C than cow's milk. In Xinjiang, the largest autonomous region of China, modern livestock centers are managing thousands of camels using GPS systems, allowing farmers to track the location of entire herds through their phones as the animals move across vast deserts. Unlike the one-humped camels of the Middle East, Bactrian camels have 2 humps, large body frames, and thick coats that help them withstand extreme weather conditions. They feed on thorny plants and salty shrubs, vegetation far too coarse for the digestive systems of ordinary livestock, yet an ideal energy source for camels. Not every herd behaves this way, but many female camels, especially those still raised in semi-wild desert conditions, retain very strong natural instincts. They will only produce milk when a calf is standing nearby. Even though each camel can only be milked by hand about 2 to 3 times per day, a single household can still supply an average of around 400 kilograms of milk per month to local processing plants. In particular, purchasing agents travel directly to the herders' homes to inspect the freshness, purity, and impurities of the freshly collected milk on site, a mandatory process to ensure the milk is neither diluted nor contaminated before entering premium processing lines. From there, the raw milk must go through hundreds of inspection checkpoints at processing plants, ranging from microbiology and nutritional content to antibiotic residues and food safety standards. Only batches that pass every test are sent into a low-temperature freeze-drying process designed to preserve as much natural protein and vitamins as possible before being sealed into premium milk powder. Today, this has become a high-end market segment worth up to $250 to $300 per kilogram, primarily targeting lactose-intolerant consumers, young children, and premium nutrition markets across Asia and the Middle East. But the real gold mine of this industry is not just camel milk, but camel hair as well. In most cases, herders harvest it only once a year during the spring by using specialized steel combs to remove the naturally shedding coat from the animals. The process must be carried out extremely carefully, because even slightly rough handling can scratch the animal's skin or break the fine undercoat fibers, the most commercially valuable part of the entire coat. After collection, the camel hair is transported to factories, where it is manually sorted, cleaned of sand and dust, separated from coarse fibers, and combed into fine strands before entering industrial spinning lines. The result is the famous camel hair fiber, known for its unique hollow structure. Lighter than sheep wool, while still providing exceptional insulation, yet softer and more breathable when worn for long periods of time. And would you believe that hundreds of households in Xinjiang now earn more than $140,000 per year from this model, while the largest ranches can generate revenues of up to $500,000 annually. Once known mainly as a desert pack animal, the Bactrian camel has now become part of one of the United Nations 100 exemplary global poverty reduction models. Once living in icy rivers since the age of dinosaurs, sturgeon are now being mass farmed across mountainous hydropower reservoirs, facilities that produce more than 200 to 300 tons of roe each year, accounting for nearly 80% of the world's caviar supply. Unlike short-cycle food fish, sturgeon farming is a long-term race that can take up to a decade just for a female sturgeon to begin producing eggs. During the early years of their lives, the fish are not released directly into natural reservoirs. Instead, they are raised inside closed recirculating tank systems, where water temperatures are constantly maintained between 16 and 20 degrees Celsius. Here, the water is continuously oxygenated to keep dissolved oxygen levels extremely high, since sturgeon are highly sensitive to oxygen shortages and poor water quality. The water must also flow constantly through multiple biological filtration layers to remove ammonia and accumulated bacteria. At the same time, the fish are fed high-protein pellets rich in marine fish oil and minerals to help develop stable fat reserves, a factor that directly determines the quality of the roe later on. After about 2 to 3 years under strict environmental control, the sturgeon officially enter the biggest transition of their lives, as they are moved into outdoor cold water reservoirs to continue growing. The reason is simple. Once mature, sturgeon can grow over 2 meters long and weigh hundreds of kilograms, consuming enormous amounts of oxygen that closed farming systems can barely sustain efficiently. This is why mountainous hydropower reservoirs, with their deep waters fed by icy snowmelt flowing down from high elevations, have become the perfect environment for sturgeon to grow slowly but steadily year-round. Yet the most time-consuming part is still not raising the fish, but waiting for the roe to fully mature. It can take nearly an entire decade for the ovaries to reach their ideal condition. At that stage, technicians lift the fish from the water and use ultrasound scanners to determine the sex, maturity level, and size of the ovaries before transferring them into processing areas. Only fish that meet the required standards are brought onto the operating table. A precise incision is made along the belly to remove the entire ovary before the quality of the roe begins to decline. A single sturgeon weighing between 80 and 150 kilograms can contain anywhere from 10 to 25 kilograms of roe. If fertilized, these eggs could fully develop into juvenile fish. But in the caviar industry, most of the roe is transferred directly into cold processing facilities before embryonic development begins. There, workers must quickly rinse the eggs in cold water, separate the membrane tissues, and sort them by size, color, and firmness. The next and most critical step is salting the roe. Salt levels are typically kept below 5% to preserve the caviar while activating its signature rich buttery flavor without damaging the delicate soft structure of each individual pearl. Would you dare hang yourself off a cliff more than 1,500 meters high just to harvest honey? It sounds insane, yet in the rugged mountains of Yunnan, Sichuan, and Guangxi, There are still communities that have preserved the tradition of cliff honey hunting for generations, producing only a few tons of honey each year from one of the most dangerous occupations in China. Their targets are giant rock bee colonies that live in an almost completely wild state. Instead of nesting in tree cavities or artificial hive boxes, these bees build massive honeycombs that can exceed 1 meter in length, attaching them directly to sheer cliff faces, places that most predators simply cannot reach. When harvest season arrives, honey hunters put on thick protective gear and make their way onto the cliff face. Yet their harvesting tools remain surprisingly primitive. To calm the bees, they burn bundles of dry grass at the base of the cliff, allowing thick smoke to naturally drift upward along the mountainside toward the colony. A team usually consists of only 3 or 4 people, and a rope ladder woven from rattan or bamboo, lowered from the mountaintop. Today, some groups have added steel safety cables, harnesses, and specialized anchor points to reduce the risks. One slip of the hand or a single misstep can send a hunter plunging into the vertical abyss below, so the most important skill is staying calm. Unlike industrial beekeeping, there are no removable frames or flat hive structures. The hunters must wave the bees away by hand while using specialized knives to cut sections of honeycomb, place them into baskets, and slowly lower them to the ground using a pulley system. However, the most important rule of this profession is never to harvest destructively. The hunters remove only the outer sections of comb that contain mature honey, leaving most of the nest intact so the colony can continue living there and rebuild for future seasons. Brazil is one of the rare countries where the cattle population outnumbers the human population. More than 200 million head spread across endless grasslands, turning the nation into the world's beef superpower. Brazil does not only raise familiar beef and dairy breeds, the country also possesses astonishing giants. The pure white Nelore dominating the pastures, the heavily muscled Belgian blue weighing over 1,000 kilograms like living blocks of steel, and the Holstein Friesian capable of producing dozens of liters of milk each day. In Brazil, cattle are not raised by traditional instinct but managed like high-performance athletes. Livestock systems operate with precision, featuring automatic massage machines that stimulate circulation, enclosed barns controlling temperature and humidity, and feeding, cleaning, and milking lines running continuously on optimized cycles. Here, livestock farming is no longer just agriculture, but has become a large-scale nutrition production industry, where technology and biology combine to maximize the productivity of each individual animal. Farewell to the cattle ranches. The journey takes us to vast Assale forests stretching across the Amazon, where Brazil supplies more than 90% of the world's Assale production, creating an industry worth over $3 billion each year. The Assale tree is a tall palm that grows widely in the Amazon rainforest, bearing small clusters of fruit hanging in bunches. The fruit looks like blueberries but is deep purple, almost black, with thin flesh and a large seed, so it is usually blended into smoothies or acai bowls rather than eaten fresh like other berries. The acai harvest season begins when Amazon locals tie a pacona strap around their ankles and climb straight up palm trunks over 20 meters high using only their strength. No ladders, no safety ropes. They move like Spider-Men through the deep forest, repeating the motion hundreds of times each day. The purple clusters are cut down and must be processed almost immediately, because within just a few hours they begin to oxidize and lose their natural value. For this reason, grinding and freezing stations are placed right beside the forest, operating continuously to preserve full quality. Remarkably, these tiny acai berries have helped change the fate of the Amazon. If forests were once cleared for cattle ranching, today Assale provides a more stable source of income, allowing many forest areas to remain intact instead of disappearing. Few crops are such that the more they are sustainably harvested, the stronger the incentive becomes to protect the entire forest. It would not be an exaggeration to say that if Brazil were to suffer a soybean crop failure, the livestock industries in Asia, Europe, and the United States would face a severe shock, as Brazil currently accounts for more than 1/3 of global soybean trade and acts as a regulating valve for the world's feed supply. Compared with the United States or Argentina, Brazil's soybean sector stands out for its vast contiguous fields cultivated in 2 crops per year, and its fleet of ultra-wide, highly automated combine harvesters operating more like a continuous industrial production line than dispersed mid-sized farms. From January to March, under the late dry season sun in Mato Grosso, combine harvesters roll into the golden sea of soybeans, lowering their headers close to the ground to gather each row with near-perfect precision, while internal systems continuously thresh and screen to ensure export standards. The stems and leaves are shredded and spread back onto the soil to prepare for the next safrinha corn crop. Golden soybeans quickly fill the grain tank. Once it reaches capacity, the unloading auger extends toward a truck driving alongside without interrupting the machine's rhythm. With a field capacity of around 50 tons per hour, each machine is not merely harvesting a crop. It is operating a crucial link in the global food supply chain. As soon as soybeans leave the fields of Mato Grosso, Brazil does not slow down. Safrinha corn is immediately sown, opening a new production cycle on the very land that has just been harvested. When harvest season arrives, the perfectly aligned fields are guided by data and synchronized mechanization. Combine harvesters lower their headers, feeding corn stalks into the threshing unit. Augers and stripping plates separate the kernels from the cob within seconds, while the stalks and leaves are shredded and returned to the field to retain moisture. Sensors monitor losses and moisture levels, and the unloading auger transfers grain to trucks driving alongside without stopping the machine. These high-capacity machines can harvest up to 60 tons of corn per hour under field conditions, helping position Brazil as one of the world's largest corn exporters. In addition, harvesting corn for animal feed also plays a vital role in dairy regions and feedlots. Unlike grain corn harvest, which typically takes place from June to August, when the plant has fully dried and the kernels reach safe storage moisture levels, corn for silage is cut earlier, when the kernels are in the milk dough stage and the whole plant reaches about 30 to 35% dry matter. Immediately, forage harvesters enter the field, cutting and chopping the entire plant into small pieces before blowing it into trailers running alongside for transport to silage bunkers, creating a stable fermented feed supply year-round. Like soybeans, corn is a foundation of the global poultry and pork industries. If Brazil were to suffer a crop failure, meat prices in Asia or Europe could immediately feel the domino effect. For this reason, Brazilian corn is not merely a crop. It is a strategic link in the global feed supply chain, where each season is operated and calculated like a large-scale industrial production system. Brazil is the largest exporter of concentrated orange juice on the planet. At times, the country has accounted for more than 50% of global orange juice trade. That means for every 2 glasses of orange juice exported worldwide, 1 originates from Brazil. Every November, the orange groves in São Paulo enter a race against time. Oranges are harvested only when they reach perfect ripeness, because a delay of just a few days can affect sugar levels and juice quality. On large farms, Harvesting machines shake the tree trunks or use soft brushes moving along straight rows, synchronized with conveyor systems that collect the fruit below. A modern system can harvest up to 100 tons per day, turning the process into a high-speed industrial production line. But speed always comes with risk. Excessive shaking can bruise the peel, knock off unripe fruit, and affect the tree's vitality. Therefore, in smaller orchards, workers still use shears to cut each fruit by hand, checking ripeness on the spot to maintain optimal quality. After each harvest, the orchards are pruned to remove old or diseased branches and to create an open canopy that helps the trees recover more quickly. Proper pruning techniques not only stimulate a more uniform flowering cycle, but also optimize yield and juice quality for the following season.